Jamal had never been one to expect much out of life. At 17, he knew what it was like to work hard just to get by. He lived in a small apartment with his mother and younger sister in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly known for being friendly. The streets were often filled with noise, arguing, and the smell of food from corner stores. It was the kind of place where you couldn't let your guard down for a second. Yet despite everything around him, Jamal still held on to hope. He had dreams of something better, even though it seemed far out of reach most days. One evening, after a long shift at his part-time job at a fast food restaurant, Jamal was heading home, walking down the same street he took every day. His feet ached from standing for hours, and his mind was busy thinking about his mom's struggles and how his sister needed new shoes for school. Money was always tight, and Jamal did what he could to help. Sometimes that meant skipping lunch to make sure his mom could buy groceries for the week. As he passed by a corner store, something caught his eye. A man was sitting on the sidewalk near the entrance, wrapped in a worn brown blanket. His clothes were old and his hair, tangled and gray, looked like it hadn't been combed in months. His eyes were closed, but his face was deeply wrinkled, showing signs of exhaustion and hardship. He looked like he had been on the street for a long time. Jamal slowed down as he walked past, giving the man a quick glance. It wasn't unusual to see people like him on the street. People who had nowhere to go, no place to call home, and no one to turn to. Jamal had seen it all before, and most days he would just keep walking like everyone else. It wasn't that he didn't care, but he knew that if he stopped to help everyone in need, he'd never make it anywhere. After all, he had his own family to take care of, and life in his neighborhood wasn't easy. But today was different. Maybe it was the way the man's tired eyes looked up at him as he walked by. Maybe it was the pitiful sight of his empty hands, stretched out in front of him, as if hoping for some small kindness. Jamal didn't know what it was, but something in him made him pause. "Hey, you hungry?" Jamal asked, his voice soft. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised the man on the sidewalk. The homeless man blinked, a little taken aback by the question. For a moment he just stared at Jamal. Then a slow smile spread across his face, though it didn't hide the weariness in his eyes. "Yeah, I could eat," he said quietly. Jamal didn't hesitate. Without thinking twice, he walked into the corner store and bought an extra meal. He wasn't rich, not by a long shot. In fact, it was a struggle for him to make ends meet, just like his family. But he could afford an extra sandwich, and in his heart, he felt that it was the right thing to do. When he came back outside, he handed the bag of food to the man, who looked at it as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "Thank you," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. Jamal nodded, not sure what else to say. He wasn't used to doing things like this, not really. Sure, he'd helped his mom with bills or bought his sister a snack when she was upset. But this was different. He didn't know what had made him do it, but he felt a warmth inside, like maybe this was what kindness was really about. "Do you need anything else?" Jamal asked, almost without thinking. He wasn't sure why, but he wanted to do more. He wanted to make sure the man wasn't hungry anymore. The homeless man shook his head slowly. "No, just ... Thank you, that's all." "You don't know what this means to me?" Jamal didn't know what to say to that, so he just smiled. "Take care of yourself," he said as he began to walk away. "Stay safe." The man nodded, watching Jamal walk off down the street. For a moment, Jamal felt a small sense of peace, like maybe, just maybe, he had done something good for someone else. He didn't know the man's name, and the man didn't know his, but they shared a brief moment of humanity, two people, each struggling in their own way, but finding comfort in an unexpected act of kindness. The next few days were like any other. Jamal worked his shifts, helped his mom with errands, and tried to stay out of trouble. He didn't really think much about the homeless man on the sidewalk. He figured he was just one of many, and he had done what he could. But deep down, something inside Jamal couldn't forget the look in the man's eyes when he received the food. It stayed with him, lingering like a thought he couldn't shake. Then, a few days later, when Jamal passed the same corner store again, he saw the man sitting on the sidewalk once more. This time, Jamal didn't hesitate. He didn't just keep walking. He stopped, stood for a moment, and looked at the man. "Hey," Jamal said, offering a small smile. "You good?" The man looked up, surprised to see Jamal again. For a second, he just stared, and then recognition crossed his face. You you came back." Jamal nodded. "Yeah, thought I'd stop by again. You still hungry?" The man's face softened. I'm always hungry," he said with a chuckle. Though it didn't quite reach his eyes, Jamal bought another sandwich, as he had the first time, and handed it to the man. This time, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he sat down beside the man on the cold sidewalk, leaning against the brick wall of the store. "Name's Jamal," he said, after a long silence. The man's eyes softened, and he looked at Jamal for a moment before answering. "I'm Thomas, Mr. Thomas. If you want." Jamal nodded, feeling like there was something more here than just food and a few words. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he felt like he was witnessing something important. Not just a stranger giving food to another, but something deeper. A connection, a moment where both of them, in their own ways, were finding comfort in a world that hadn't always been kind to either of them. In the days that followed, Jamal continued to stop by the corner store. Each time he passed by, he'd look for Mr. Thomas sitting outside, his weathered face hidden under a hood or his blanket. Sometimes the man was asleep, resting on the cold concrete, and sometimes he'd be staring off into the distance, as if lost in thoughts that only he could understand, but Jamal always made sure to say hello. It didn't take much effort, just a quick greeting, a smile, and a little chat here and there. At first, the conversations were simple, mostly about the weather or about how busy Jamal's day had been. But over time, Jamal began to notice the small details about Mr. Thomas, the way he spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word carried the weight of his entire life. He noticed how Mr. Thomas's eyes, although tired and worn, had a certain spark in them when he talked about the past. It was as if he was reliving moments that meant something to him, a time when he had everything but lost it all. Jamal started to look forward to these moments. They had become a part of his routine. He'd bring Mr. Thomas food whenever he could spare it, sometimes just a sandwich, sometimes a drink to go with it. And in return, Mr. Thomas would offer small pieces of wisdom, bits of advice, or stories from his life that Jamal had never expected to hear. The stories were always honest, sometimes sad, and always full of truth. They weren't the kind of stories Jamal heard at school or from his friends. They were real-life experiences, stories that spoke of dreams lost, regrets, and the harsh lessons of life that most people never learned until it was too late. One afternoon, after Jamal had handed him a warm burger and fries, Mr. Thomas shared a story that stuck with him. I used to have a good life," Mr. Thomas began, his voice low, almost as if speaking to himself. "Had a family, a nice house, good job, but I lost it all. It didn't happen all at once. It was little things at first. Drinking on the weekends, missing a day at work here and there. But then one day I woke up and realized I'd lost everything. My wife, my kids, were gone. I had no one left, and I didn't know how to fix it." Jamal sat there, listening closely. He couldn't imagine what Mr. Thomas had gone through, losing everything. How did someone survive that kind of loss? Mr. Thomas continued, his voice quieter now. "I ended up on the streets, and it's harder than you think. People look at you like you're nothing, like you don't matter, but you know what? The hardest part is, I didn't know how to get back. I didn't know how to fix the things I'd broken." There was a long pause. Jamal didn't know what to say. It was a lot to take in, a lot to process. But one thing was clear. Mr. Thomas was not just a homeless man. He was a person, a man who had lived a full life before everything fell apart. He wasn't just a stranger asking for food. He was a man who had been through things Jamal couldn't even begin to imagine. "I'm sorry," Jamal said quietly. "I didn't know." Mr. Thomas gave him the small, almost sad smile. "It's okay, you couldn't have known. Most people don't look at me and see a man who had a family, a life. They just see someone who's fallen. But you You see more than that. You see a human being." Jamal didn't know how to respond. But there was something about Mr. Thomas, words that stayed with him. He realized that all this time he had been seeing Mr. Thomas just as someone in need. But now he understood that Mr. Thomas was more than just the man asking for food. He was a person with a past, with a story. And that story was far more complex than Jamal had imagined. From that day on, their conversations deepened. Jamal started asking more questions, listening intently as Mr. Thomas shared more of his life. He talked about his job as an accountant, how he had worked hard for everything he had. He spoke about the first time he had met his wife and how their love had grown over the years. The laughter they shared, the plans they made for their future. Jamal could hear the longing in Mr. Thomas's voice as he spoke about the family he had lost, as if each word was a reminder of something precious that he could never get back. Mr. Thomas also shared stories of his struggles, how he had turned to drinking to escape the pain of losing his family. It started out as something small, just a few drinks to take the edge off. But over time, the drinking got worse, and his life began to spiral out of control. He lost his job, his home, and eventually his family. It was a cycle that was hard to break. And even now, after years on the street, it was clear that Mr. Thomas was still battling the ghosts of his past. Jamal didn't judge him. He didn't look at Mr. Thomas as someone who had failed in life. Instead, he saw him as a person who had made mistakes, who had suffered, but was still trying to find a way to move forward. That was something Jamal could relate to. He wasn't perfect either. Life in his neighborhood wasn't easy. There were days when it felt like the odds were stacked against him, when it seemed like his dreams were too far out of reach. But Jamal had hope. And somehow, hearing Mr. Thomas' story gave him even more hope. Over time, Jamal began to visit Mr. Thomas more regularly. Each time he brought something for him, sometimes food, sometimes a drink, or even just a warm jacket when it got cold. They would sit together talking about life, about dreams, about everything and nothing at all. Jamal found himself learning from Mr. Thomas in ways he hadn't expected. He learned that no matter how difficult life became, no matter how many mistakes one made, it was never too late to change. Jamal also realized that sometimes it wasn't about fixing everything. Sometimes it was just about showing kindness, about showing up for someone when they needed it most. One day, as Jamal handed Mr. Thomas another sandwich, he found himself asking a question he hadn't thought to ask before. Do you ever think you can turn things around? Do you ever think you can get back what you lost? Mr. Thomas looked at him, his face thoughtful. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the sandwich in his hands for a moment before speaking. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe not, but it's not about going back. It's about moving forward. And maybe that's all I can do now? Just ... move forward? Jamal nodded, understanding more than he could put into words. He wasn't sure what the future held for Mr. Thomas, or even for himself. But one thing was clear, their lives were connected. In a way neither of them had expected. And no matter where they were headed, they would continue to walk forward together. One evening, as Jamal was walking home from work, he noticed something wasn't right. The sun was just setting, casting a soft orange glow across the street. But when he reached the corner store, he didn't see Mr. Thomas sitting outside like usual. At first, Jamal thought maybe he had just missed him. Sometimes the man wandered off to find a quieter place to rest, or maybe he had just gone inside to warm up for a bit. But when Jamal walked closer, he saw that the space where Mr. Thomas usually sat was empty. He stopped, his heart suddenly racing. Something felt off. Jamal stood there for a moment, looking around, wondering if he had somehow just missed the man. But the street was unusually quiet for that time of day, and there was no sign of him. Unaware. He hesitated for a moment, feeling a growing worry inside of him. What if something had happened? What if Mr. Thomas was in trouble? Without wasting another second, Jamal walked up to the store's door, opening it and stepping inside. The bell above the door rang as he entered, and the warm air inside the store hit him, but he barely noticed. His mind was on Mr. Thomas. He looked around for a moment before approaching the store clerk, an older man with graying hair who was wiping down the counter. Hey, have you seen that guy who usually sits outside? The older man with the blanket? Jamal asked, his voice tinged with concern. The clerk looked up from his work, and his face seemed to drop slightly. Yeah, I saw him earlier today, he said. But he hasn't been around for a while now. You know, he was looking pretty rough when I last saw him. I think he was starting to get sick. I told him to get help, but he wouldn't listen. Jamal felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had never seen Mr. Thomas look sick, but he knew life on the streets could take a toll on a person's health. If Mr. Thomas was sick, things could be worse than he had imagined. Do you think he's still around? Jamal asked urgently. Maybe somewhere nearby? The clerk shook his head slowly. I'm not sure. I think he left earlier today. You might want to check the alley behind the store. He sometimes rests back there if he's trying to stay out of the cold. Jamal didn't wait for another second. He thanked the clerk quickly and rushed to the back of the store. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned the corner and entered the narrow alley behind the building. The ground was littered with trash and debris, and the shadows seemed to make everything feel darker than it really was. He scanned the alley for any sign of Mr. Thomas, his mind racing. What if he had collapsed somewhere, or worse, what if he was in serious danger? The thought made Jamal's stomach churn. He called out softly, his voice hesitant. Mr. Thomas, are you back here? There was no answer. Jamal's eyes swept over the alley, looking for any sign of movement, anything that would tell him where Mr. Thomas was. He was about to turn back when he heard a faint sound, a soft groan, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He quickly moved toward the sound, and as he rounded the corner of a broken-down dumpster, he saw him. Mr. Thomas was lying on the ground, his body curled into a ball, his face pale and his breathing shallow. His blanket was tangled around him, and he looked weak, far weaker than Jamal had ever seen him before. Mr. Thomas? Jamal said softly, kneeling beside him. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, gently shaking him. Mr. Thomas, are you okay? The homeless man's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he didn't seem to recognize where he was. His eyes were glazed over, and he blinked a few times before focusing on Jamal. Jamal? Mr. Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here? I was looking for you, Jamal said quickly. You're not looking too good, Mr. Thomas. We need to get you help. Mr. Thomas shook his head weakly. I'm fine. Just a little tired, that's all. Jamal didn't believe him for a second. Mr. Thomas's face was too pale, and his body was shivering despite the warmth in the air. He could see the exhaustion in the man's eyes, and the way he was barely able to sit up made it clear that something was wrong. No, you're not fine, Jamal insisted. I'm taking you to the hospital. Come on, let me help you. Mr. Thomas tried to protest, but Jamal wasn't about to let him refuse. He knew that if he didn't act now, Mr. Thomas might end up in even worse trouble. With some effort, Jamal helped the older man to his feet. Mr. Thomas leaned heavily on him, his body unsteady, and Jamal supported him as they slowly made their way back toward the main street. Once they reached the sidewalk, Jamal flagged down a car, desperate to get Mr. Thomas the help he needed. The driver, an older woman who recognized Jamal from the neighborhood, immediately offered to take them to the hospital. As they drove, Jamal tried to keep Mr. Thomas awake, but the older man's eyes kept drifting shut, and he seemed to be losing his grip on consciousness. Jamal's mind raced as the car sped through the streets, and he couldn't help but think about how fragile life really was. Mr. Thomas had been so full of stories, so full of life just days ago. Now here he was weak and sick, unable to even walk on his own. The thought weighed heavily on Jamal's heart. When they finally reached the hospital, Jamal quickly rushed Mr. Thomas inside, where nurses immediately took charge. They led the two of them into the emergency room, where doctors began to assess Mr. Thomas's condition. Jamal stood off to the side, feeling helpless as they worked to stabilize him. It wasn't long before a doctor approached him, giving him the news that Mr. Thomas was severely dehydrated and malnourished. He's lucky you brought him in when you did, the doctor said. His condition could have gotten much worse, much faster. Jamal let out a breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding. He knew Mr. Thomas hadn't been in the best health, but he hadn't realized it was this bad. He felt a mixture of relief and guilt relieved that Mr. Thomas was getting the care he needed, but guilty that he hadn't noticed just how much the man was struggling. As the night wore on, Jamal sat by Mr. Thomas' side in the hospital room, waiting for him to wake up. He didn't mind. He was just glad to be there for him, just like he had promised. And in that quiet hospital room, Jamal made a promise to himself he wasn't going to let Mr. Thomas face this alone. No matter what happened, he would make sure that Mr. Thomas didn't have to face his struggles by himself. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and hope. Jamal spent most of his time at the hospital, coming and going between his shifts at work and his visits to Mr. Thomas. The doctors said that Mr. Thomas had a long road to recovery ahead of him. His body was weak, and he was struggling to regain his strength after being malnourished for so long. But with each passing day, he seemed to improve a little more. Jamal had no idea how long Mr. Thomas had been suffering like this, how long he had been hiding the pain behind a smile or a simple, "I'm fine." When he visited, Jamal would sit by the bed, sometimes talking to Mr. Thomas, sometimes just sitting in silence, offering company when it seemed like the world had forgotten about the old man. One afternoon, as Jamal sat next to Mr. Thomas, he noticed how the older man was beginning to look better. His color was returning, and the dullness in his eyes had faded, replaced by something brighter. He was awake more often, his mind clearer, and though he was still weak, it was evident that he was beginning to heal. "Hey," Jamal said, trying to break the silence. "You look a lot better today." Mr. Thomas smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I feel a little better thanks to you," he replied softly. "You saved my life, Jamal. I don't think I could have made it much longer on my own." Jamal shook his head, feeling a bit awkward. "I didn't really do much. The doctors did all the work." "You did everything that mattered," Mr. Thomas said with a serious look. "You got me here. You didn't let me stay on that street, letting things get worse. Most people would have just passed by, you know. You didn't. That means something." Jamal felt a wave of warmth fill his chest. He hadn't thought about it that way. He had simply acted because he saw someone in need, someone who mattered. But hearing Mr. Thomas' words made him realize that his small act of kindness had meant a lot more than he ever expected. As the weeks passed, Jamal visited every day, after school and work, doing whatever he could to make Mr. Thomas stay more comfortable. He brought books to read, and sometimes he'd even play cards with him or tell him stories about his own life. Jamal wasn't sure why he kept coming back. Maybe it was because he had formed the bond with the man. Maybe it was because he had grown to care for him more than he expected. One day, when Jamal arrived at the hospital, he found Mr. Thomas sitting up in his bed, smiling as he stared out the window. "You're looking good today," Jamal said, his voice full of encouragement. Mr. Thomas turned to him with a grin. "I've been thinking, Jamal, maybe it's time I start thinking about getting back on my feet. Really trying to get back to a normal life." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "You mean like getting a job or something?" Mr. Thomas nodded. Slowly, "Something like that. I've been in this hospital long enough to think about my past, my mistakes, and what I've lost. But I'm not getting any younger. I know I can't go back, but I can still try to move forward. Maybe I can work for a place, help people who need it. Maybe, just maybe, I can be a little useful again." Jamal's heart swelled with pride. "You can do it, Mr. Thomas. I know you can." "Maybe," Mr. Thomas said, his smile more hopeful. "But it's going to take work, and I'm going to need help. I'll have to rebuild my life, step by step. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thomas began attending a local rehabilitation program designed for people recovering from addiction and homelessness. It wasn't easy for him, and there were times when he wanted to give up, when the memories of his past life would pull him down. But Jamal was there, every step of the way, offering support, encouragement, and a reminder that it was never too late to start over. It wasn't long before Mr. Thomas started attending support meetings, and through the program, he found a new sense of purpose. He learned about resources available to help him find housing, and soon he moved into a small apartment in a quiet part of the city. It was far from luxury, but it was his own space, a place where he could begin to rebuild his life. One afternoon, Jamal came by to visit, and Mr. Thomas opened the door to his new apartment with a wide grin. "You've got your own place," Jamal said, his eyes bright with excitement. "This is amazing, Mr. Thomas." Mr. Thomas looked at Jamal with gratitude. "It's a start, Jamal, it's a start." As the weeks passed, Mr. Thomas continued to grow stronger. He found a job working part-time at a community center, helping other people who were in similar situations, people who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild their lives. Just like he was, Mr. Thomas found purpose in helping others, and it gave him a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in years. Jamal would often stop by the community center to see how Mr. Thomas was doing, and each time he was impressed by the progress the man had made. It wasn't just about having a job, it was about having a reason to get out of bed every morning. It was about showing up for himself, for the people around him, and for the community he was now a part of. One evening, as Jamal sat with Mr. Thomas at a local diner, the older man looked at him with a serious expression. "Jamal," he began slowly, "I don't think I ever thanked you properly for everything you've done for me. You saved me, son. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one." Jamal smiled and shook his head. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Thomas. I just did what anyone would have done." Mr. Thomas grabbed Jamal's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "No, Jamal, you don't understand. You didn't just give me food. That day you gave me a chance at life. You showed me that it's never too late to try again. I'll always be grateful to you for that." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat, and he didn't know what to say. He had no idea that his small act of kindness would lead to such a big change in both their lives. What had started as a simple offer to share a meal had turned into a friendship, a journey of healing and a lesson in hope. "I'm just happy you're doing well," Jamal said softly. Mr. Thomas smiled, a real smile, one that lit up his face in a way that made Jamal feel like everything he had done had been worth it. "Me too, son, me too." As the night went on, they continued to talk about their dreams for the future, about what lay ahead for both of them. Jamal had his eyes set on college, and Mr. Thomas was determined to keep moving forward, to keep helping others, and to live a life he could be proud of. And in that moment, Jamal realized something important. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of someone's life forever. He never imagined that giving a homeless man a meal would lead to a friendship, a shared journey of recovery, and the kind of bond that could stand the test of time. They both knew they had more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face whatever came next, together. Months passed, and life seemed to slowly settle into a new rhythm for both Jamal and Mr. Thomas. The bond they had formed through small acts of kindness, conversations, and shared experiences had grown stronger. What started as a chance encounter, a brief moment when Jamal decided to share a meal with a homeless man, had evolved into something far more meaningful. Jamal had always known that life wasn't easy, especially for people living in tough neighborhoods. But his experiences with Mr. Thomas had taught him more about resilience, hope, and the power of second chances than he could have ever imagined. Jamal's own life was moving forward, too. He had finished his high school year with good grades, and after much effort, he had received an acceptance letter from a local university. It was a moment that filled his heart with excitement. Jamal had always dreamed of going to college, but with the challenges of his home life and the pressures of his neighborhood, it had seemed almost out of reach. Now that dream was becoming a reality. He sat in his small room, the acceptance letter in his hands, looking at it with a sense of disbelief. His mom had cried when she read the letter, and even his younger sister had jumped up and down with excitement. They were all proud of Jamal, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like they had something to celebrate. But as much as Jamal was focused on his own future, he knew that he couldn't forget about Mr. Thomas. The old man had come so far in his own journey of recovery and rebuilding his life. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. Mr. Thomas had a small apartment in a quiet part of the city now, and he worked part-time at a local community center, helping others who were struggling just as he had once been. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was His life a life he was slowly reclaiming, one day at a time. One Saturday, Jamal went to visit Mr. Thomas at his apartment. The door was open, and when Jamal stepped inside, he was greeted by the smell of something cooking. It was a pleasant, comforting smell, something hearty and warm. Mr. Thomas was standing by the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon, his face lighting up when he saw Jamal. "Hey there, son," Mr. Thomas greeted with a wide smile, his voice filled with warmth. Come in, come in. I made some stew. I figured it was time for you to taste some home-cooked food." "No more fast food for you?" Jamal chuckled, feeling a sense of comfort wash over him. It wasn't about the food, though it smelled delicious. It was about the fact that Mr. Thomas, the man who had once been homeless, was now in a place where he could offer something to someone else. It was a gift in itself. "You didn't have to do all this," Jamal said. Sitting at the small kitchen table, Mr. Thomas shrugged as he ladled stew into bowls. "It's the least I can do, Jamal. You've helped me so much. I'm just glad I can offer something back." Jamal felt a rush of gratitude and pride for Mr. Thomas. The transformation he had witnessed in the old man was nothing short of amazing. When he first met Mr. Thomas, he had been a man with no hope, struggling to survive day by day on the streets. Now Mr. Thomas had purpose. He had a job, he had a home, and he had people who cared about him as they sat down to eat, Jamal told Mr. Thomas about his college plans. He spoke excitedly about his classes, about the future, and about how he couldn't wait to start this new chapter of his life. He talked about the scholarships he had applied for and how he was making plans to move into a dorm soon. His words were full of hope, and Mr. Thomas listened attentively, his eyes sparkling with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Jamal," Mr. Thomas said after a moment of silence. "You're going places, and I have no doubt that you're going to do great things, but don't forget where you came from, all right?" Jamal smiled, feeling a lump form in his throat. He knew Mr. Thomas wasn't just talking about the neighborhood, the hardships, or the struggle to survive. He was talking about the kindness that had brought them together. He was talking about the heart it took to make a difference in someone else's life, even when it seemed like you had nothing to give. "I won't forget," Jamal said softly. "And I'll always be here to help you, just like you've helped me." Mr. Thomas nodded, his face serious now. "That's all I ever wanted, Jamal, to know that there's someone who understands, someone who can show the world that it's never too late to turn things around." As Jamal left Mr. Thomas' apartment that day, his mind was full of thoughts about his future. He felt a sense of responsibility now, not just for his own life, but for the lives of others. He knew that no matter how successful he became, he would always remember Mr. Thomas and the lessons he had taught him. The lessons about kindness, about giving, and about the power of change. It wasn't long before Jamal was preparing to leave for college. His family helped him pack up his things, and his mom gave him a big hug, telling him how proud she was of him. His younger sister made him promise to call every week, which Jamal happily agreed to do. He was excited to start this new journey. But there was one thing he wanted to do before he left. Jamal made his way to the community center where Mr. Thomas worked, eager to say goodbye before heading to the university. He found Mr. Thomas in the small office where he had been helping others, organizing resources for people who were homeless or struggling with addiction. When Mr. Thomas saw Jamal, his face lit up with that familiar smile. "Well, look who's here," Mr. Thomas said, standing up to shake Jamal's hand. "I thought you were heading off today?" "I am," Jamal replied, "but I wanted to stop by and thank you one more time for everything. You've changed my life in ways I can't even put into words." Mr. Thomas shook his head, his eyes a little misty. "You don't need to thank me. You've done all the hard work, Jamal. You're the one who made the choice to help me. You're the one who made the difference. And now, look at you. You're going to college, going after your dreams." Jamal felt the weight of Mr. Thomas' words. He had always thought of Mr. Thomas as someone who needed saving, but in reality, it had been the other way around. It was Mr. Thomas who had taught him about resilience, about kindness, and about the power of never giving up. No matter how hard life gets, before leaving, Jamal promised to stay in touch with Mr. Thomas. He promised to keep him updated about his college life, and in return, Mr. Thomas promised to keep doing the good work he had started. They would both keep moving forward, supporting each other along the way. As Jamal boarded the bus to the university the next day, he felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. And no matter how far he went or how much his life changed, he would always carry the lessons from Mr. Thomas in his heart. And Mr. Thomas, who had once been alone on the streets, now knew that he was never truly alone. He had Jamal, and Jamal had him. Together, they had found a bond that would last forever, a bond formed not through blood, but through the simple, powerful act of kindness.